You may be black, you may be white, you may be Jew or Gentile. It don't make a difference in our house. And this is fresh.
Living stereo stylus as it plunges down through a canyon of sound where music is made.
The birth of the first ever DJ was the first person playing records to a group of people and making them dance.
That's how it all started. It's become a global phenomenon.
The 70s was a hedonistic time based around discos, going out and meeting your future wife and husband.
Disco was a celebration of diversity, bringing down the barriers between different clans and just celebrating the diversity of life.
Disco was so dominant. People talk about punk as being like the thing of the mid to late 70s, but it was tiny in comparison to, you know, what disco was doing worldwide.
What disco brought essentially was a new kind of culture, a club culture.
That is when the advent of mixing came. People mixing one track into another.
Francis Grasso was a New York DJ who was, you know, one of the innovators of mixing and what later became beat matching and everything. So, you know, he played an important role in how the DJ developed the way that we know it now.
Grasso gave power to, you know, the DJ, realizing that mixing tracks together without stopping, sustain a beat, a rhythm, keep people dancing, keep an energy and a vibe going. That really was the beginning of what we now know to be the modern DJ, or the role of the DJ.
The technology side of things is like a big part of it. The evolution of, I mean, a crossfader is slowly going to fade one from the other. But having mixers with a really quick crossfade so you can transform and scratch and stuff like that, that was like revolutionary. People didn't have to use the little switches at the top that crackled loads. 1210's obviously like a game changer.
Allowed you to pitch up and down, obviously, your vinyl.
And even like they're so sturdy, I've seen people do standing on them with their hands and doing spins and stuff like that. Yeah, you definitely couldn't do that with the Newmarks or whatever was before that.
It's funny when you watch the clip of Greg Wilson on the Tube with Jules Holland.
Back in February '83, I was the first DJ to mix live on TV. I was invited by Channel 4's The Tube.
You get records and you actually change them about, don't you, when you're playing them? Don't tell me quite how it's done yet, but don't you think that might annoy, like the scratching thing, might annoy the people who've spent all the time making the records?
Well, that's it, that's the danger, but the thing is when a record's been played in the club for a long time, people get a bit fed up of hearing it, and it's nice to hear it in a different way, and that's why I kind of mix around with them, play about with them a bit.
Then it sinks in, you know, like the enormity of what you're doing, that if this messes up and everyone's going to be watching you, you're going to look like the biggest fool on God's planet. The cameraman, there was a handheld camera, and the guy was hovering really close, looking around, just scared stiff. He's going to bang them, the needle's going to jump, and then, you know, what's going to happen? And then they get into this countdown, counted from 10 to 1, and live on air, you know, and it's like, oh, God. So you're there with it. And so I started, and the cameraman did. He actually says in the commentary,
The cameraman's just jogged the record there.
That's going to give Greg a few problems, I should think.
but the record didn't jump. And, you know, that's SL 1200, the sturdiness, it held. Because if it had gone, you know, I mean, I was like, I would have to re-cue, you know, I wasn't a turntablist like these hip-hop guys that came later, just drop the needle somewhere and it's all right. I would have been like all over the place. But everything went well and you know, it was great.
You know, this was really the first time people at home who weren't exposed to this saw what it was to actually be a DJ.
People there just, you know, bemused, like what's going, you know, they're not interested even hardly, you know, like the kind of new romantic-y looking people that were kind of scattered about at that time.
It's really funny now, you know, everybody wants to know how to DJ. And when I'm DJing, I have guys coming up to me asking if they can stand next to me in the DJ booth and watch what I'm doing and understand how it works. And, you know, it's funny when you watch this video from 1983, people weren't, you know, initially receptive to this. Now everybody wants to know how to do it. You know, it's funny how things have changed and how DJing has risen to prominence over bands and over live music.
Basically, I went to New York in 1986 to attend a music business event called the New Music Seminar. And I went to a DJ session. I was talking, introduced myself as the DJ from the State Ballroom in Liverpool. And afterwards, a young black guy from Chicago came up and said to me, "Do you play house music in the States?" And I said, "Pardon?" He said, "House music, do you play it in the States?" I said, "Actually, I'm not really sure what house music is. Could you explain?" And he said, "Well, I go to a club called The Warehouse in Chicago, and house music is called house music because of this club." And he said to me, "I describe house music as a subtle cross between Philly Soul and New Order." So if you could imagine Blue Monday by New Order, which is a computer-generated disco track with a soul vocal, that's how he explained house music. And I asked him to write me down some titles. And the next day or the next week, I went up to Downstairs Records, which confusingly was upstairs, and gave the list of records to the guy behind the counter and bought them. And they were all Chicago house records. And to be honest, I recognised this is the future. I just knew instinctively.
It would have potentially remained purely underground, but for what happened in the UK. I mean, these Chicago DJs at the height of house were earning very little for gigs in their home city. But if they came over to Manchester or London or Nottingham or somewhere like that, you know, they were stars, you know, everybody knew who they were.
I suppose through house music and trance and progressive house in the 90s, that's really where you got all the real superstars in the game, you know, Pete Tong, Cole Cox, Sasha.
People like Fatboy Slim getting to #1 and playing to stadiums. And ended up this very much recently, a couple of years ago, playing at the Olympic ceremony, because DJing has very much become an established part of pop culture, not just underground culture.
DJs are the new rock stars in a sense, because the majority of people go to a night out and it's a DJ.
Especially with like, the EDM craze in America, all the DJs, the biggest headliners of festivals are now DJs instead of bands, which I think is just because of the change in trend of music. Things like indie music a few years ago was a lot bigger than it is now. No one really cares about it anymore. It's a lot smaller community. It's kind of become a niche. The biggest stars in dance music headline rather than the biggest stars in sort of rock music.
I think that gets a bit silly, really. It's a bit much. You know, we're DJs at the end of the day. I think a band, there's a lot more skill involved in like a band performing on a stage than what there is a DJ. Especially the headline DJs, I mean, yeah, it's all a bit silly, really. I've heard them like throwing cake at the crowd, just trying to make things like interesting while they're doing what they do.
I'm really not into the kind of like EDM stuff that's happening in America and stuff like that. I mean, I'm sure it's great fun if you're there and you're into that music, but yeah, I'm not into that sort of big, massive sort of thing. But if a DJ's good and they can pull that kind of crowd, then I think it's amazing.
I'll say the idea of DJing and the idea of the nights has not actually changed. I'd say it's more about the equipment used.
Because when I was younger, I would buy a lot of vinyl, and you know, over the years, then a lot of DJs started getting into CDs, and then a lot of software programs have come along, like Serato or Traktor, and now everyone's using USB sticks. So everyone is pretty much walking around with the tiny little USB stick that they just plug in.
I think that's the difference between back then and now. Now it's just so easy to find music. It's like everywhere, Spotify, iTunes, whatever. Back then it's like you spend hours in record stores, which I miss. I miss that a lot.
There was one point in Ibiza a few years ago where there was only me and pretty much just me and Sven Vatt playing vinyl. I was mixing some original disco tracks. A very well-known DJ, whose name I won't expose, came up to me in the middle of my set and he said, "What are you doing there? Why aren't you pressing mix?" I said, "'Cause they're disco beats." He said, "Well, why don't you stick it in record box and then you can just get it to mix them for you?" I said, "Because these beats are real drums and the time it would take to bring those drums into line isn't going to happen." I said, "So I was just mixing the old-fashioned way, by hand, just like they did in the 70s. There's no other way." So sometimes, even with the greatest technology, you've still got to go back to basics.
Some people don't even DJ anymore, you know what I mean? They're booked to play a DJ set and they're not really even beat matching, it's all done for them.
I mean, now you've got kind of vinyl-only nights because they kind of like the idea of the way that vinyl sounds and stuff, but then people use Serato. Now, anyone that knows anything about that kind of system will know that using Serato is the same as using a computer-based system. So you want a vinyl night because you like the idea of how vinyl sounds, but the sound isn't actually coming out of vinyl in the first place, it's coming out of a sound card. You just happen to be using a vinyl or a CDJ to control it. People have got kind of misconceptions of what they class to be a purist and what not to be a purist.
you know, as technology evolves too much, then you're gonna have to start calling them something else, aren't you? DJing's about beat matching, and the imperfections are great as well. You know, if you see someone playing off a laptop and it's all just perfect, it's like I don't think there's much excitement in that. If you're riding a mix and it's slightly drifting and you sort of ease it back in, the crowd are sort of with you, and not that I lose many mixes, mind, but I'm just saying, you know what I mean? Yeah, so the future of the DJ, I don't know, we're just gonna keep doing what we're doing.